You're listening to World Class from the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University. We bring expertise on international affairs from Stanford's campus straight to you. I'm Michael McFall, host of World Class and director of the Freeman Spogli Institute. We're bringing the focus back to China today and its economy in particular. More specifically, we're going to talk about the wealth gap between the richer urban parts of China and the poorer rural areas, and how that gap could contribute to the slowdown of China's economic growth. We're doing that by celebrating a fantastic book. Here it is, folks. I got to put it right so you can see. Oh, you can't. Never mind. Okay. Because of my background there. But it's a book by Scott Rozelle and Natalie Hell called Invisible China: How the Urban-Rural Divide Threatens China's Rise. Scott is the co-director here at FSI of the Rural Education Action Program. His research focuses almost exclusively on China and is concerned with the economics of poverty and inequality, with an emphasis on rural education, health, and nutrition. This new book, a fantastic read, really builds on, I think, Scott, tell me if I'm wrong, decades of research that you've been conducting in China. But congratulations for the book, and thanks for being with us here today.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, I'm very happy to be here and share with you. Thanks for asking me.
Well, so let's start with the first obvious question. What is, quote unquote, the invisible China? What does that, why did you choose that title for this book?
So the invisible China is pretty easy to define. It's rural China, right? And China's population is about 1.4 billion, just past 1.4. 60% of that population is rural. That's 840 million people. 1 out of 9 people in the whole world live in rural China. They're the
entire world lives in rural China. I just want to emphasize that incredible statistic you just shared.
It is amazing, and yeah, and that 1/9 is mostly invisible. They're the workers, the farmers, the self-employed informal workers, and this is going to play a part of our real role in some of the what's going to be happening down the road. The elderly, the children that reside in the villages and the migrant communities. They're that's invisible China.
Well, tell us a little bit more about that. I think most Americans, and maybe everybody around the world, maybe most people in Beijing, for all I know, don't know much about them. Describe some of the basic characteristics of the invisible China compared to the China that we see in the news here in the United States.
Sure. And you know, sort of the reason they're invisible is, indeed, Mike, I've been working for 39 years in rural China. that counts as decades, I think, with an S. And when I first started working there, 85% of the entire population lived in these rural communities. They were farmers or rural factories. And in those early days, right, the city-dwelling college students, the professionals, the government officials, the professors, right, they all grew up in rural villages. So they spent their time going back and forth between their city homes and their home villages, visiting their parents and grandparents. They'd travel across the country in buses, right, going across the countryside in a terrible road system at that time, right? And they'd have to stop in village inns at night, and people knew, what was happening out there. Today, it's so different. In some of the elite universities in China, 1 out of 20 students has rural backgrounds. It sounds a lot like some of our affirmative action problems we have in our universities. Buses are a thing of the past, right? What's a bus, right? If you don't fly, you take a high-speed rail, and at 350 kilometers an hour, if you try to take a photo of a village, you can't even see it. It just blurs. And it's not a localized problem. The media I mean, you've watched CNN, you know, when they used to have clips of China when we were going back and forth on, and you'd see Beijing, Shenzhen, Shanghai. You'd never see, you know, glimpses of these, you know, this 1/9 of the world's population. You know, they live there, they grow up there, they leave there to work, and then they come back. That's you know. That's who they are, and that's why they're invisible.
Well, tell us, the subtitle of your book is How the Urban-Rural Divide Threatens China's Rise. Explain that hypothesis a little bit in the subtitle there. Why do you think it threatens China's rise? I think most people already believe China has risen. It's a superpower. It seems to be, you know, the entire 21st century is going to be this contest between the United States and China. Your book suggests it may not be so simplistic as that. Tell us why.
Well, the basic problem, and this is what I usually call, Mike, I call it the biggest problem China has. Now, China has lots of problems. We have lots of problems. Every country has one. But this is the biggest problem China faces that no one knows about. And when I tell people the underlying foundation of the problem, I guess it's the symptom that we see, people gasp. I'm talking if they're at Tsinghua University or Peking University down to a chamber of commerce. You say in the middle income world, if you compare China to, you know, the 100 other middle income countries in the world, China has the lowest level of education in the entire middle income world. Number one. Now, this is according to OECD statistics, you know, which they define a middle income education indicator as a healthy or not, as the share of that entire labor force that's been the high school. So only 3 out of 10 out of 800 million, 500 million, they're not even high school dropouts. They haven't even gone to high school. Right. So China has 500 million high school dropouts. Okay. And now the question now becomes, you know, I guess, you know, why does that trigger poor economic growth? Right.
Right.
So, you want me to continue on that?
Yeah, explain that.
Yeah.
I want to make sure our listeners understood this properly. It's the gap between the urban and rural education levels that troubles you so much, right? That is what is different about this middle income country compared to the others that might have a better distribution of education. Is that right, or is that not exactly right?
Yeah, well, I actually don't. Well, there's a huge education gap. You're right, and the reason why this is an invisible gap, I think, it's because the other side, the urban education, is, you know, 6 million engineers a year, right? And, you know, 300,000 students, you know, going to our universities, you know, getting college educations, and most of them coming, you know, going back to China. It's, yes, China isn't lacking on the upper end, which they need when they want to try to move from middle income to high income. Okay. And what I'm a development economist, right? And I actually think this book has, you know, lessons for all developing countries. And those lessons are sort of, you know, why didn't we ever hear about this poorly educated workforce in the past? Well, China has spent the last 40 years going from poor to middle income, right? And when you're poor, what you need is a workforce with 3 attributes. They can read, they can write, and they're disciplined. And they make great factory workers. They make great construction workers, right? But as we move from middle income to high income, right, things change. Right. And when a country, in a high income country in today's world, right, if you want to be in the labor force, a productive member in the labor force, you need to be high skill for these high tech jobs. Learn how to learn. You're going to have to switch jobs, you know, oftentimes. So you need the level of human capital to be able to do that. Right. You need to be the South Africas, the Singapores, the Irelands, right, the Israels, where, you know, 8 out of 10 people, when they were middle income, were already high school educated, right? So now the factories closed, they moved to China, right? Now factories in China are closing and moving to Vietnam and Bangladesh and Ethiopia. What are they going to do, right? They need to retrain themselves and become, financial analyst assistants and hotel, managers and book accountants, not, putting widgets together. And
Right.
if you don't have the math, the science, the language, the computer skills in today's world, you're going to be left out of that economy. I think that's what we've seen the lesson, I don't know if you remember, Mike, were you still in elementary school in the 1980s? A young man, Mike is. I was in grad school, and we studied Mexico as the most rapidly developing country in the world. They were called the next Taiwan. Of course, what people forgot was only 3 out of 10 of their labor force had a high school education or higher. And when the maquiladoras started moving to China, right, what happened to those laid off Mexican workers, right? They moved. They had an opportunity that Chinese workers in the future is not going to have. They went to America. They went into the informal economy, or they went into organized crime. And Mexico transformed from this, an OECD. They were admitted to OECD because they had made it to high income. They haven't grown since the early 1990s. And a lot of it has to do with that labor force that couldn't, and China looks just like Mexico. Much more like Mexico than they look like South Korea or Ireland.
That's very sobering, and it must be very sobering for the leadership of China, of course. What is your understanding of their understanding of the problem, and then second, how do they escape? Which sounds like the middle income trap you're talking about.
Yeah, well, you actually in China today, you can't use the word middle income trap because China says they've already, by definition, missed it.
Is that right?
But yes, absolutely. We had a conference postponed because it was called China's Progress Through the Middle Income Trap, and we had to change the title of the conference to go forward. So yes, I think that let me say this. The government is part of the problem. The government starting to recognize the problem is doing something about it, but I think because the problem is so invisible, they aren't getting to the roots of it. So the part of the problem is China's automating faster than any country in the world today. I mean, our colleague Hongbin Li, who just joined FSI faculty and is a research fellow over in CEPR, shows that there are more robots now in China and automation going in China than the whole rest of the world combined, right? Made in China 2025, right? And they're accelerating with the next 5-year plan. Global supply chains are inducing firms to move out. China's trying to stop that, but of course, foreign firms continue to move. Wages rise, and you have,
right.
And this is before COVID-19, right? And the recent tensions, which I think are just going to sort of make this problem even worse. So they're behind that, right? It's sort of that they're pushing. If you look at the employment sectors today, manufacturing labor is falling, construction labor is falling, agriculture labor is falling. The only sector of the labor force that's rising is informal, low skill, low wage workers. That they have no benefits, no hours, they aren't covered under any of the working laws. And so it really reminds you of, a Brazilian economy that grows and then stagnates, right? Or a South Africa or a Turkey economy. Okay, so do they know about it? 15 years ago, 15 years ago, only 1 out of 2 15 to 17-year-olds. So I'm not talking about the whole labor force anymore. I'm talking about the new entrants to the labor force, the high school age kids. Only half were going to high school. 20 years before, it was only 1 out of 4. So they made a little progress for the 20 years to get to 50% enrollment in high school. By 2018, it was up to 87%. And before COVID-19, the goal was by this year to have everyone in high school. So they sort of see that, right? Now, half of them going to vocational schools and half of them going to academic high schools. There's problems with the college vocational schools, but I think it shows you that they realize that there's this problem out there, right? Okay. Now, the real problem, of course, is, that you can get kids in school, right? But do they learn? And, are they going to get those skills? And I think that's what China doesn't quite realize, that it's more than just building high schools. It's a much deeper rooted problem.
Well, talk a little bit more about the longer term implications of that problem. Decades out, will this be a major drag on China's growth? Is it a solvable problem? Speculate a bit further out. You mentioned Mexico already. What does the Chinese economy look like in 20 or 30 years?
Well, I've been working on China, like I said, for almost 40 years, and I've been in the debates where the social scientists, including the economists, have said, right, they'll never be able to reform. They'll never reform state-owned enterprises. They'll never survive WTO entry. They're never going to respond. They're never going to survive the financial crisis of 2008. And they blew through all those. So,
Good to be humble, right?
Yeah. It is. I have my humble pie list that we'd need another podcast to go over or two. Yes. And so is it going to happen? What I always get asked the question, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, is China going to look more like the Philippines, or is it going to look more like Japan or South Korea? Okay. And I think that, think about this. You're automating, you're getting broken supply chains are moving out. This is without trade frictions in the world, right? And China's going to be relying mostly on domestic demand, right? Unfortunately, domestic demand, the demand for consumption is very, very low. Where are these people in the world? I could see an informal labor force that reaches up to 300 or 400 million people. China doesn't need 300 or 400 million people as landscapers or nannies or dishwashers, right? And wages are already falling. The growth rate of wages are falling. We just released a paper using Chinese data, government data. So, at a certain point of time, this hidden economy out there, people in it are going to say, do I want to stay in and try to survive within the system, or am I going to, move into, organized crime or, into social? And I could see this becoming a huge, huge problem. Now, back up. I want to use humble pie. So this is what I say. I think it's a definite possibility. What are the probabilities? I don't care. 10%, 50%, 35%. I don't care what you put on that. If it's a probability at all, China should go buy insurance on this. Right?
Okay.
Right?
Right.
When I've driven a car for 40 years. I've never had an accident, right? I buy insurance, right? Just in case, right? Why doesn't China buy insurance? I hate to pay my insurance company, Mike, right? Who wants to pay? But look at this insurance policy. This insurance policy fee, right, is putting in early childhood education. It's boosting the preschools. It's building up the rural education. China's rural education today has exactly the same problem as the U.S. education system. In the United States, we have 40,000 school districts. In China, there's 40,000 school districts. They're all locally funded in the United States. They're all locally funded in China. And guess what, right? If you live in Palo Alto, California, your kids go to really nice schools because the tax base is high and we invest a lot in education. But if you go to, elsewhere in the U.S. where the tax base is low, the schools are really, really poor, as we know. That's what it is in China, and they have to get at this problem, right? Local, and guess what? If you're a hero rural kid and you get all the way through high school, guess what? 95% of those kids leave the county and never come back.
Never come back, right?
So why should this tax, scarce, fiscally, fiscally nervous, fiscally weak local county ever support rural education? They have no benefit for them. So they have to have this fundamental change that has to be out there. And I think, like I said, if it never would have gone down that path, well, you've got this human capital, asset that you've built that's going to make you even stronger.
Interesting. Fantastically complicated paradox you just outlined. Maybe last question, Scott. What does this mean, for U.S.-China relations, if anything? I would think we as Americans want to see Chinese rural students educated. I think that's a win-win for the world. But the flip side might be that this makes the Chinese economy stronger, and that creates tensions, and you have greater tensions for the United States and China. How do you see it fitting into the bilateral relationship?
I'm just a simple little development economist that
all right, that's
squats in villages and collects data, right? I think about this a lot, right? And I think it's very important. So here we are. Let's say we don't invest in the insurance, and or the insurance payment is too late and we don't have good enough insurance, and China does stagnate, right? Or collapse, or, slow growth and polarize. And you get the rise of social unrest. Social unrest goes up, investment goes down. The country has to divert assets to try to contain that. And guess what, right? I mean, China has lived, its legitimacy is on income rises for its population, right? So what happens if not only the polarized rural sector, but they slow down the rest of the economy? How does the regime legitimize itself, right? And you're a specialist in Russia affairs as well as many other things, Mike, and we were so fortunate to have Gorbachev, in charge of the Soviet Union when the walls came down. But other things could have happened, right? I think a stagnating or collapsing China is much more dangerous than a stable China. Now, I want that stable China to be fair and work in the world system. And I think the Biden administration has a huge task to getting the world together to go try to negotiate a new regime where China can play a productive, fair role in that. I think we want to see China. It's going to be good for U.S. economy. It's going to be good for Asia and the world stabilization. And it's going to be good for those rural kids.
Wow, great answer to a very complex, hard question. Scott, fantastic conversation. I really strongly urge everybody to go and buy Invisible China. If you don't buy books like this, they don't get published. And we need books like this to be published. We need to understand China, especially the invisible China that Scott Rozell's been talking to us about with today. Thanks for being here with us, Scott.
Thanks, Mike. I really appreciate it. I know you're interested in China these days because everyone who's interested in the world is, and look forward to a lot more interaction together. Thank you.
You've been listening to World Class from the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University. If you like what you're hearing, please review us on Apple Podcasts. We'd love to know your thoughts. And be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever you're listening to stay up to date on what's happening in the world and why.